Two, three. Hi, everyone. My name is Les Velez, and welcome to the Opus interview series. Opus, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1994. Our mission, simply put, is to help people having paranormal experiences. I'm the co-founder and chairman, and for more information about Opus, please go to our website at opusnetwork.org. Well, I am thrilled today to have back with me Pamela Nance. She is a cultural anthropologist and archaeologist, paranormal and UFO researcher, and explorer of higher consciousness. She experienced unexplained paranormal and extraterrestrial phenomena in early childhood, followed by an out-of-body experience as a teen and a near-death experience in her early 30s. After experiencing such high strangeness, she began research into consciousness and the survival of consciousness after death. Over a 4-decade period, she researched areas of metaphysics, quantum theory, astrology, astronomy, numerology, esoteric beliefs, religion, philosophy, numerous other disciplines and beliefs, and became trained as a healing touch practitioner, past life regressionist, hypnotherapist, dowser, and shaman. My goodness, whew, that's a lot. But that's fantastic to have you here again. I am absolutely thrilled. And we're going to go down a little different paths than the last time that I interviewed. So I'd like you to just start rolling and tell us what your experiences have been of late.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like to thank you, Les, for inviting me back to your show. It's a pleasure to be here, and I enjoy always speaking with you and your audience. So this is a real treat. So in the first interview, I kind of did a quick narrative of basically all of the high strangeness that affected me in like a near-death experience, out of body, paranormal, and that type of stuff. But today I thought I would just talk about some instances where there was sort of divine intervention in keeping me here on this planet. And the first happening when I was in utero. My mom was in her second trimester of pregnancy. She lived in a country home with a screened-in back porch, and that's where she did her laundry. She had one of those old wringer washers that, you know, a lot of people had in the 50s, and she was out on the back porch running the clothes through the wringer, and they would drop into this long oval-shaped basket. And so she finished washing, walked around, bent over to pick the basket up, and she heard like a pop and sort of a whirring sound or a swishing sound over her head. And when she stood up and looked, there was a hole in the screen. And then she looked to her other side, and there was a hole in the wall. And my dad came running, and evidently there were some people hunting nearby, and there was a stray shot that came through that back porch, through the screen, over her back, and lodged into the wall of the house. So at that second that she bent down to pick up that basket of clothes, the shot went past her. Had she been standing, based on where it hit and the side of the house, it would have most definitely hit her in the chest, and most likely we both would have died. I'm sure I would have, and I'm not sure what her survival would have been. So that was a story I always heard. My dad dug the slug out of the wall and tied a string around it. And, you know, we often looked at it and just wondered, you know, at this miracle that she wasn't killed, that, you know, there was some intervention there.
Absolutely. That's fantastic that she didn't get hit.
Yeah,
What timing.
Really. So the next, and this is, I didn't talk about this in my last interview, but it really is my earliest I guess, near-death experience. I was just a few weeks shy of my sixth birthday, and this was in the early 60s. There was not a widespread measles vaccine available during this time. I think it came out maybe a couple of years later, but there was a really serious measles outbreak in the United States, and it was called the red measles, German measles, but
Mm.
a lot of children were becoming extremely ill, dying. The schools were filled with sick kids, and one of my siblings brought the measles home. That sibling had a very mild case, but as a really young child, I developed a very serious case of measles. And there was not a lot they could do back then. This was a virus, there was no antibiotic or viral medication. You just kept the child comfortable and hoped, that things didn't turn too horribly wrong. So my parents, after about the first 24, 48 hours, they moved me to their bedroom so they could sit with me around the clock. I was just so extremely ill, covered, absolutely covered in the rash and high fever, cough, runny nose, you name it. So I often, would wake up and see them, whispering over me, and then I would go back to sleep. And at one point, I just felt so bad. I thought I was dying. And you might ask, well, what does not even a 6-year-old kid know about death? About a year or two before that, I had gone with my parents to my grandmother's house. And back then, people died at home. She was in her late 80s, maybe early 90s. They knew she was dying. And so the family gathered there. And I remember, being a part of this and watching her pass away. So that stuck with me, this dying. And I felt so bad. I thought, oh gosh, am I dying like grandma? And my dad, scooped me up in his arms and he said, no, you're not dying. You're going to be fine. He laid me back on the pillow and I opened my eyes and it was like the ceiling of their bedroom had disappeared. I could see the sky, the blue, blue sky, the white, fluffy clouds, and then this brilliant, brilliant white light coming down. And from amidst this light was a hand. And I took that hand and off we went, just flying through the clouds faster and faster, and then like in outer space. But this being was so incredibly bright. I couldn't see the features. I could feel the hand, but I really couldn't see the form, just this brilliant white light. And that kind of dissipated, and we were standing on the earth, on ground. And we were looking at an ancient village, like there was a sort of a half stone wall encircling this little village. The homes appeared to be like mud and half timber and some rocks. And so we walked, he sort of, and at this point I could see the shape, and I did surmise that it was a male just from the figure. But he was still just, surrounded by this brilliant light, but I could make out some of the features. And so he kind of did his hand like walk forward, and we walked onto this path into this little enclosed village. And at each house, they had tidy little yards, green grass, beautiful flowers over to the side, animals grazing. And we got to one of the little houses, and the family was tending the yard. And prior to that, no one had really paid any attention to us. But we got to this one particular house, and I made eye contact with these people. And I knew, even at that young age, I felt this familiarity, like, is this my family? I know these people. And we locked eyes, and there was a little girl there that I really felt like I knew. And I looked up at this celestial being, is what I've come to call him,
Right.
and he looked at me and he nodded his head like, because I was thinking, this is my family, and he nodded as though I was correct. And as soon as he nodded, I'm like being pulled backwards from this scene. And I open my eyes and I'm back in bed. And my parents are over me. They're sobbing. Evidently, I heard later, as I became older, that they couldn't awaken me and they were
Mm.
getting really scared. And so when I opened my eyes, of course, they were really happy. So I don't know if that was a near-death experience or if it was a guide showing me a past life, a past family. Um,
What did the person that was with you, what did they look like? Do you have a recollection of that?
well, Les is like not even a 6-year-old kid. At that point, I'm in the Southern Baptist community, and I'm thinking this was Jesus.
Hmm.
This looked like Jesus to me. It was a male, kind of long hair, the beard, just all the brilliant light, could have been like a robe. I don't know. Um, so that was my thought as a really small child. But as I grew and studied and researched and meditated, I'm quite certain it was a guide, one of my guides. Um, but at the time, there was some religious
Hmm.
connotation applied just because of my background.
Sort of a guardian angel,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, exactly. But I recovered, and it was after that that I could leave my body. So that kind of opened, this bilocation ability that I talked about in the first interview of being able to bilocate for about 4 years as a young child. But the interesting thing about that experience, I guess about a year later, I like to visit this church that my brother and his wife attended. And it was a Pentecostal holiness church. I just found it very interesting. The Baptists were very reserved, you sat in the pew, whereas the holiness, it was a show. These people would speak in tongues, they would run the perimeter of the congregation shouting. The preacher would rip his tie off and sweat. I mean, it was it was all in. So I really enjoyed visiting that church. And I was in, the Sunday school class one Sunday, and we were in a circle, and I felt someone come in and walk up beside me, and there was only one empty chair, and the little girl sat beside me. And I looked at her, and she barely had any hair, and she was really pale and thin and appeared to be sickly. Um, but we locked eyes, and I knew, even like as a 7-year-old kid, that that was the same little girl I had seen in that village.
Hmm.
Just by locking eyes, she looked different in that experience than she did in the Sunday school, but I knew it was the same child. And we just connected. We held hands. And I went back a couple of other Sundays just so I could see her. And no one told me anything about this little girl, her, what she was going through. And so one Sunday I went, I was very excited to see her, and she wasn't there. And I found out that she had passed away. She had leukemia. And that's
Oh,
why her hair was so thin. She was undergoing treatment. Um, so I felt like that was a real gift, to meet this little girl, even though the circumstances were so sad. But I'll never forget her. Um, so that, added
that
to
is,
all the other things that that happened through my life, just, kind of piled up and changed me even more. Um, and around the same time period, I was probably about 8 or 9.
Uh-huh.
I had an older sister that I liked to go spend the night with. She was married, um, was fairly a newlywed, and it was just a real treat to get to go stay with her. And so I would visit her church and got to know the kids there in the congregation. And so they invited me on a hayride. Um, One fall, they were going to, you know, we were going to carve pumpkins afterwards. But anyway, one of the local farmers had a tractor and a huge trailer that he hooked on the back and filled it with some um, hay and stuff that we could sit on. And so the trailer was just really packed full of adults and kids. And so I decided to sit like right above the wheel well on the edge of the trailer, and I was holding on. And so here we go. It's very exciting. It's dark, and we're going down this dirt path on this farmer's property. And I don't know if we hit a bump or what happened, but I was thrown backwards off the wagon. And I remember going back and seeing my feet kind of come up over my head. And then I could only hear like a whooshing sound, like whoosh, whoosh, and just a bright, bright white light. And I'm not feeling my physical body. I'm not feeling any pain. I'm not even like still on the earth. I mean, it did not feel like I was any longer on terra firma. It was like I was in space and this white light and this whooshing sound, whoosh, whoosh, and a voice saying, "It's not your time.
Hmm.
It's not your time." I mean, I don't know how many times the voice repeated that, but it was several times. It's not your time. It's not your time. And so the white light dissipated. I opened my eyes and I'm flat on the ground beside this wagon. And they've somewhere have brought this board, and they put me on this board, and they're getting ready to pick me up to take me to the hospital. And I opened my eyes and I'm fine. They're asking me,
Yeah.
wiggle your toes, move your legs, move your arms. I think they thought I'd broken my neck because of the way I landed.
Right.
Um, but I was fine. So I think it might have turned out
You
really
know,
bad.
it's interesting that, I've heard this said so many times that it's not your time, where people have had these near-death experiences, and these entities, whoever they are, say that. Um, I mean, there's been so many people telling their stories during these near-death experiences, and they hear the same voices saying the same thing. That's pretty amazing to me. That there's another level of reality we just don't understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we really do have angels and guides that look after us. We just have to pay attention and connect with them and believe in them. It's easy to tune these things out and choose not to believe, because sometimes believing is harder, because people face ridicule and questions. And fortunately for me, I was always supported by my mom and my parents and my family and even my peers and throughout my work history. So I've been very lucky in that regard, being able to share my experiences.
These types of experiences definitely come along with stigma. Uh, People are afraid to talk about these types of things because of ridicule, as you mentioned. Uh, so, and I think I mentioned this during our first interview that, I really, uh, am, glad that you have chosen this path and coming out with the things that you have experienced, and it's very helpful for other people that are having experiences like this, that they understand that there are other people having very similar things going on in their lives. And so I commend you for, you know, being brave and talking about these things. And I'm glad you got the kind of support that you did get.
Yeah. And, it's wonderful too, Les, to have folks like you that get our stories out there, and help everyone in doing so. I've had a lot of people contact me and it's interesting. Some have had lifetime experiences and others are just now starting to open themselves up, to other areas of consciousness. And, I help as much as I can. I provide reading lists and different modalities that they might want to pursue as far as meditation and yoga and that type of thing, just to connect with that higher self. But I find that very rewarding to be able to help people. And
Oh,
I've done a little bit of remote healing a few times. I don't do that very often. I'd rather do hands-on, but a few cases, have been so desperate. I just wanted to try to help.
yeah, I've been an experiencer of the healing process from people remotely. I had a shoulder problem for a while, and one of the people in our support group um, uh, was basically able to remotely deal with my shoulder, and it was an interesting process. And so it does work. I mean, these are the kind of things that we fully, from a scientific standpoint, don't understand, but it does work, and
Right,
and it just blows one's mind that those kinds of things are possible, and this universal consciousness that we are all part of, um, and connected to, uh, is a fascinating part of this whole thing. So yeah, I always am so impressed with people that have that ability, and and these kind of things too are all these phenomena. Whether it's UAP or UFO or poltergeist activity or the ability to be psychic or telepathic, it's all connected in an incredible, interesting way. And we're now starting to, from a scientific standpoint, there's been a couple of studies with regard to telepathy that they're getting a lot closer to maybe understanding it better and understanding what part of our brain is involved with that.
right. Yes, it's wonderful to see um, the scientists and MDs and PhDs finally coming on board. Some of them, not everyone, of course, but there's this whole movement, the science of consciousness, that is really taking off, and more people in a professional realm, degreed, which adds, credence and people are more apt to believe, I think, if it's coming from an MD or a PhD. Um, but it's nice to see that community becoming more involved. And I think it's because some of them have had their own experiences, like Eben Alexander, who was a neurosurgeon and for years heard stories that his patients brought back, but just, tried to look at the nuts and bolts and, the brain is dying and trying to make sense of these last images and thoughts. And then he had his own experience and he's a changed man and has written books. And so now that people like Eben and others are coming on board, um, it's more acceptable, in the mainstream. And we've, I would venture to say 90% of the of the people on the planet have had some kind of experience.
I totally agree with you. And that goes back to some of the experiences I've had in a support group where people have told me they've seen me before, and of course they kept telling me that they saw me on board a craft, and I had no conscious recollection of that. Uh,
Wow.
and it had happened a couple of times, and so I basically started to formulate a theory that we've all had experiences, whether we consciously remember it or not.
Right. I agree. Um, so, I guess in talking about these divine intervention type occurrences, I did talk about in my last interview the near death experience that I had in my early 30s. And just to kind of touch on that quickly, I won't go into any great detail. That again was an event that where I could have easily died had there been a few seconds in the other direction. When I woke up that morning feeling extremely ill, having the stomach bleed, but not knowing, when I got up to call down to my husband, who was stepping out the door to go to a flea market, um, I wanted a soda. So I called down, bring me a soda back. I was so thirsty. I turned to go into the bathroom, and that's when I collapsed and lights out. Well, Frank was stepping out the door and he thought he heard me fall, and he even debated on whether or not to come back in.
Hmm.
And and then he said to himself, well, she hasn't felt well. I should probably go check on her.
Right.
So another, 3 or 4, 5 seconds in the other direction, he would have been out the door. He would have never heard me. But he came upstairs, he found me, did CPR, basically saved my life. So there we go again. So I don't know how many I'm up to at this point, but I guess the next where I was actually saved, um, it was in the spring of 2024.
Oh,
I was
wow.
out on a country road going to my cabin where I grew up, and I was in this really long stretch of highway that sort of you can see this long stretch, and it's about a 50 mile per hour zone. And down at the end of the visual stretch, you can see the road curve just a little to the left. And at that point, there's the end of a road coming out of a development. And so I'm coming towards that development exit, and I see like a big Ford F-150 sitting there. And you know how you can tell the person is going to pull out? I
Oh,
could just tell that the way, I don't know if it was just the way he was starting to creep forward or if I just knew this guy's going to pull out in front of me. So I'm almost on him, I'm going 50 miles per hour, and here he comes. He's coming out right in front of me.
oh man.
But at that split second, time slowed to a crawl. I mean, and all I could hear again was that whoosh, 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 and everything is just slowed, like as slow as you could possibly go. I make eye contact with this man. He makes eye contact with me. He's an older guy, gray hair, salt and pepper beard. He's got a red and black flannel or checked
Hmm.
shirt. I mean, I can still see him, a heavy set guy, big guy sitting up in that truck. I could see the truck, the cab behind the driver's seat, all the details. We locked eyes. I'm looking at him, just waiting for the
For the crash.
collision. Yeah. And this but it was like just being underwater or something. Just this whoosh and this slowness. And I see him like go past. And then when I kind of realized what's happened, I'm probably an eighth of a mile down the road.
Oh,
And
well,
I look back, and at that point, I've gone around this curve, so I no longer see him. I don't even know how I got that far down the road, but we didn't touch.
wow. That's interesting. There was definitely an intervention there. No question about it. You were just plucked out of that situation and put in a whole new situation
Yeah.
down the road. Oh my goodness.
But I really wanted to try to find him because he
Yeah.
had that experience too,
Mhm.
unless he was oblivious of, it appeared he was looking straight at me. Um, we locked eyes, but I don't know if he was experiencing what I was experiencing.
Yeah, that would have been interesting if you would have been able to find him and talk to him about that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
right after that, it wouldn't have been that interesting for him because I was pretty pissed off
Oh.
until I realized, hey, I didn't crash.
Right,
I'm
right.
still okay.
It's amazing that you didn't crash.
I know. I cannot explain that. I cannot explain that. I had to pull over. I mean, I was that shaken by the experience. And of course, it's the first thing I told my husband when I got home. You're just not going to believe what happened to me.
Your description of time slowing down, like you were, it just like being in water or something.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. You hear that professional athletes talk about time slowing down when they're really good at what they're doing. That they see things totally differently, and it- that thought just came to my mind because I've heard that. Uh, uh, Talked about a lot in professional sports, where when somebody is really good at what they do, um, that they just see things a lot like in slow motion, and so they can complete whatever they're doing a lot better. So, but anyway,
Yeah. Well,
that's
we've all heard the stories about people who've had like a near-death experience saying that, their life flashed before their eyes in just a split second. That's not what happened, but maybe it's sort of similar, that
mhm.
they're seeing that their life flash before them, maybe even though it's their entire life, and it probably passed before them very quickly. Maybe, they saw it slowed down and in great detail. Um, but yeah, I can still see that guy in that truck. And I'm just so grateful to whoever. Um, I have several
Yep.
guides, and I'm really not who was sure who was responsible, but
When you talk about your guides, do you have like a name for either one of them, or how close are you with them?
um, one I'm very close to. She is my great Aunt Rosie.
Hmm.
She was a root doctor, a midwife, a healer, an intuitive, and I've felt that she's been with me since I was a little kid. I see her when I meditate, and I visited a psychic down in Savannah, and she was working. She did massage and her readings, as she would massage the neck and the head, and so she was giving me a reading at the same time, and she said, "You have a lot of people over on the other side, a lot of guides and people that care about you. And there's so many, they're like pulling chairs up and they all want to talk first." But she said the loudest one is a woman named Rosie. Do
Oh
you
my goodness.
know Rosie? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that's my great aunt. Um, so she identified Rosie, and then I also have Elizabeth. Um, and I think Elizabeth might be part of my star family, but she shows up quite a bit. And she would show up during my paranormal investigations, but she's also shown up during some of my missing time events. So there's Elizabeth and Rosie. And then there is a Buddhist monk named Hotai.
Hmm.
And I met him in this garden when I had my near death experience as a 33-year-old. That experience was kind of twofold. I talked about what happened like here in my home, but there were 3 additional days where I was in ICU and coded a couple of times and kept going like to this garden. And that's when I met Hotai. And so I have a Buddhist monk, and then the celestial being. I always just feel like I want to call him Gabriel. And I think
Hmm.
that stems maybe from childhood and the angel Gabriel, but um, that's just how I think of him as Gabriel. And then I know my mom is one of my guides. She came through as one of the people pulling up a chair, wanting to the first position. Uh,
Sure.
so when I meditate, I do call upon them, and sometimes, I've been able to visit them, like in this wooded area. Um, so, it just kind of depends on the type of meditation that I'm practicing. So, yeah, they're there. You just have to connect.
No, it's interesting that you have not just one, but multiple people that are in your corner, so to speak, and that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I have never really done any meditation. Um, I my mind just keeps whirling away, and I can't calm down for some reason. Um, and so it's very difficult for me to meditate. But I've been in a number of situations, health wise, where I could have kicked the bucket, and but for whatever reason, my timing was good that I went to the doctor in a timely fashion, and they found something, and they took care of it.
That's
I've
great.
been able to thank two doctors for basically saving my life, uh, and so I guess my time was not up.
That's right. So you've had
Uh,
someone in your court.
yes, somebody somehow is helping me out here, and it's like what I do here. I would have never thought, you know, that I would be doing these kinds of things, but your path is kind of, I think, predetermined to a certain degree. Yes, you can do certain things off the main path, but I think it's self-ordained that you're going to be doing certain things in a certain way until it's time for you to move on to that next level.
Yes, I agree. And also having, I don't know the correct adjective, but just being able to recognize that path in the road, like you come to a fork, should I go to the right? Should I go to the left? And sometimes people overthink it. And I've tended to always go in the right direction that opens me up to more people who are like-minded, and it just kind of snowballs. And you, I think in the beginning you have to really pay attention to what's being put in front of you, almost like little breadcrumbs. And as you start paying attention and going along, the breadcrumbs get bigger, and you meet just wonderful people who are like-minded, and things start happening.
Yeah, I think we have so many distractions in our lives that we in while your ability to meditate is bit, probably a wonderful thing for you because it does calm you down. It focuses you, and then you understand better which path to take, the left or the right. One of my things that I've personally utilized is my gut. I don't know what else to call it. It's just a feeling down here that okay, this is right, or it feels good, or it doesn't feel good.
Yes, you're calling on that intuition, that we
Mhm.
all have, that gut feeling, that little voice, in the head
Yeah, absolutely. It's
that,
it's
I
it's
just, I think you and I come from a generation that were not as distracted as the younger people today. So many people are just so out of touch with what's happening around them. It just blows my mind, that you're
it's
outside on a beautiful day and everybody's got their device out looking down instead of looking up. Look up at the sky, look at the birds, the trees.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Here's this little device that causes us to have issues, right here.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, but anyway, that's the world we find ourselves in. And there are positives to the technology, of course.
Mhm.
It's just I would like to see people just kind of pay attention and look around and be kinder to each other.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So now having that kind of a background, when you talk about this consciousness a little bit more, what is your thinking about this topic?
Well, I've thought about it my entire life. I've read so many books. Um, I really like Helena Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine, and sort of her approach to consciousness and religion and our ancient cultures and what we've brought from our past through history, our belief systems. She was a really interesting Russian woman that lived in the 1800s. She was born about 1830.
Hmm.
Not into a prominent family, but she was not poor, so she was educated. She learned to read and write, and not all women were given that opportunity during that time. So she was fortunate in that regard, but early on was a very spiritually oriented person who, through her class, had the opportunity to travel and meet um, religious people in India and Nepal, and so she lived with monks and studied ancient Sanskrit, writings and ancient Buddhist text, and this was unheard of that they would allow a female in, and I'm not really sure why they did. Maybe she was really convincing, or maybe they could see her spirit and knew, hey, this is someone we need to teach. So she was taught by these masters for decades, and she started the Theosophical movement in the 1800s. And so I really like that approach to consciousness and creation, that we're all part of the creator. And the way she describes it and what she's learned from these ancient doctrines is that we're like in the fifth creation, and things will eventually go dark, and then there's light. And that's happened 5 times. And that kind of goes along with Genesis. First there was darkness, and then there's
Hmm.
light. And so if you read her teachings, and you have to have a handbook to kind of decipher everything, it's so complicated. It's just like, what she's saying is so true. There's a gnosis to it, this knowing, this deep knowing. But basically, we're all part of the creator. The creator wants to experience everything, good, bad, whatever, through us all. We're parts of that creator and that consciousness, and we're all part of each other. And consciousness is not part of the brain. It emotes through the brain. It travels through the brain. Um, we can tap into it. And in part, it does, help form how we view the world and our emotions. And Um, but it's not in the brain, it's not in the body, it's outside of us, and we're all a piece of it. And I've also, through my research, come to understand that we're just these extreme energetic beings when we're on the other side. And we can't bring all of that energy with us. We're in a dense 3D environment. So we bring a portion of that energy back through each lifetime, but more of the energy stays on the other side. And that's our higher self that we can tap into, that connection to that higher consciousness that is us, that's part of us, of who we are. So when I meditate, I try to tap into those things. And so I just, it's a very difficult topic to define because it means different things for different people. To me, it's just, it's beautiful to think that we're not just these materialistic flesh and blood bodies, that there's so much more to us, and there's so much more that awaits us on the other side. I'm not encouraging anyone to leave early by any means. We need to stay and learn. That's part of our journey. But we know very little. What the beauty is when we get to the other side, and then, okay, this is where I belong. This is where all the knowledge is.
What are your thoughts on reincarnation?
I believe in reincarnation. I think that, our soul has to grow, and we can't do it in one lifetime. We can't learn what it is to be a thoughtful, loving, conscious being in just one life. It takes many lifetimes. And I think Earth it's almost like grammar school. We have to keep coming back until we get it right. And that could be 5,000 lifetimes, 10,000 lifetimes. For others, it may be much fewer. It just depends, I think, on your soul's evolution and how newly created you are. So I do believe in reincarnation, that we have the opportunity to come back. And so my goal in this life is to go out remembering as much as I can about this consciousness and the things that I've learned, so I don't have to keep coming back. I think maybe when I crossed over last time and came back, I brought some of that knowledge with me because it started coming through at such a young age. It was like bombarding, it's hard to ignore. So I think I'm evolving spiritually. I don't know if I'm to the point where I don't have to come back here, but I want that to be my goal, to go to a higher.
It's interesting because I've been told I'm an old soul. So I said, what, am I stupid? How many times do I have to come back to learn a lesson?
I know. Hard. It's hard being human.
These people that told me that they saw me on board the craft, I finally, after the second person who was totally different, a year and a half later, told me that they saw me on board the craft. I was sitting on this bench naked and I was freaking out. And they told the entities told this person to go over to calm me down. I went and got regressed. I had 3 regressions and I had multiple past lives, but I didn't find out anything about being on board a craft. However, subsequent conversation I had with another person, they said, "Well, maybe you were on board in a previous lifetime, and this person somehow tapped into that." And this is the thing about time and space that gets manipulated in ways that we just don't understand. And how is it possible?
Yeah. I like the analogy of time. If you stand on a mountaintop and you look down into the valley and there's a river, and you have this great viewpoint, you can see where the river starts to come into view. You see it beneath you. You see where it is going out of view. But so you see this entire expanse of the river. But if you're in the river, you only see that part of the river. You're caught in the current, you're just right there in that part of the river. So I think that's time. If we move beyond being caught in this river of time, this little pocket, if we move beyond that, it's as though all time is existing at the same time. And I say that just based partly on what I encountered doing the paranormal work. I mean, that in itself was validation that there are other layers of time that are happening all around us. Um,
And that brings me to the point where, or the topic of psychic abilities, and I've been always impressed with people that have that ability to look into the past, look into the future, and certainly the present. They have this incredible ability, and so it's like they're standing on top of that mountain and
mhm.
looking down at this river from beginning to end, and that's fascinating. Having psychic abilities. Are you psychic yourself?
I am, but I really don't have a lot of control over it. I just have, maybe it's more intuition than it is psychic. Like I don't predict, but I'll have thoughts or feelings or something, and then it'll occur, and so it's not as though I can predict things. Like I had a dream. I guess it was a psychic dream. Um, in the 70s, latter part of the 70s, it was a terrible nightmare, actually, for about 3 nights in a row. I was traveling. It was a flying dream. It was like I was a bird, but it was me, but I was flying right above this road that goes out to the cabin. It's a different road than where I had almost had the encounter, but um, so I'm flying along, and the entire ground, everywhere I looked, was covered in bodies, dead bodies, just everywhere. It was horrible. I woke up, I was so upset, couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, dreamed the same thing. Next night, dreamed the same thing.
Hmm.
And I thought, what could this mean? This is horrible, seeing all these dead bodies. And it made me think, is there going to be a war? What's going to happen? And so at the time, I had a boyfriend, and we went over to his mom and dad's house. About the time the 6 o'clock news came on, and as soon as we were walking in the door, the news came on, breaking news, massacre in Jonestown.
Oh, wow.
And they showed the aerial photo of all those dead bodies. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my dream. But I
Yeah.
was like locally, but I saw the dead bodies 3 nights in a row. So I have that kind of stuff happen, that I have dreams, I have precognition, but I don't, like tell people what to do or anything.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a tricky thing. It's like people have been told, well, if you have psychic abilities, or you think you do, and something comes up in your mind, write it down and mail it to yourself. So you have a record of it, and then if it actually does come true, now you have some proof, and not just a thought that is, you know, was there and now gone. But
Right.
uh, eh, yeah, this is the part that you know, some people, skeptics, if you will, have real issues with all of this and saying, "Well, no, it's not happening," but it is happening. It is happening. You know, I've interviewed a psychic on here, and she's up in Canada. Patricia Mona is her name, and she works with the law enforcement and has had just finding missing people or dead people or trying to figure out who did it type things, and it works. It works.
Yes, it
So
does.
um, it's amazing that the stigma that's attached to a lot of this is starting to melt away, and that not only goes for those types of things, but the whole UFO UAP type of a thing, and extraterrestrials that you've had a lot of experience with per our last interview. Um, and that's to me, you know, is still one of my favorite topics, especially now with all these congressional hearings that have been going
Mhm.
on, and whistleblowers coming forward and talking about the fact, yes, we have alien bodies, we have retrieved crashed UFOs and things of that nature, and people have been writing about all of this for a long time, for decades. That yes, it's true, it's here, and now it's starting to have people with credentials, substantial credentials, coming forward and talking about all this, and this all folds into what you do in so many aspects, and so I'm just absolutely thrilled with your revelations and your experiences that are remarkable. So thank you.
Certainly, I like sharing. If I can reach one individual out there to help them along, I'm happy to do it. If we have time, I would like to talk about my most recent
Yes,
experience.
absolutely. Go for it.
Um, so let's see. I think the evening, it was Saturday night, January the 11th. It started to snow, and it was very exciting because we have not had any substantial snowfall in this area for about 3 years. So we were super excited. It started snowing a little before dark, and then started coming down really heavy. And um, I decided to go upstairs to our upstairs bedroom. There's a deck off of these French doors where we have a huge halogen light mounted. And that's basically for security purposes. Since we sleep up there, if I hear something at night, it's nice to be able to turn on this bright light that illuminates basically the entire backyard. We don't use it often because it uses a lot of power, and I'm into conserving energy, and it's also great for watching snowfall.
Mm.
So I went up, I guess, shortly before midnight, and my husband, he was already in bed asleep. So I didn't turn on, any lights or anything. I just flipped on that halogen light and, just saw this beautiful snow coming down. The entire yard just lit up, so pretty and white and peaceful, and it just made me want to meditate. So I grabbed my laptop, and a friend of mine, Lee, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his last name because it's almost impossible, but um, Lee is a mandala artist.
Mm.
He has a website called Soulful Mandalas,
Mm.
and he uses sacred geometry and just does beautiful work. So he had shared one piece of work with me out of 200. I chose one particular mandala. And so he's allowed me to put that on my website and on my YouTube channel. And so I use it for meditation. And only a couple of times prior to this particular night. So I got the laptop out, sat on the bed, opened it up, pulled up the mandala. And so I start doing my breathing and relaxing and staring at the mandala. And it started rotating clockwise right
Mm.
before my eyes, like, and then was going faster and then faster. And I'm just kind of getting sucked into this thing. I couldn't pull my eyes away. I'm getting sucked in. And then it went from that mandala into like, you remember that 1960s show, Time Tunnel?
Yes.
You remember what the tunnel looked like, the black
Sure.
and white time tunnel?
Yeah, yeah.
So it turned into that. And I am I'm actually sucked into this thing. I no longer feel feel myself on the bed. I don't feel the laptop, nothing. I'm just like being sucked into this time tunnel. The tunnel kind of dissipated. Then I'm in this like multicolored like vortex of just colors, and I'm spinning and I'm just kind of being tossed about. And I mean, I really felt like I was flying off the planet, you know, at 1,000 miles per hour. Craziest feeling. And so I'm experiencing these feelings of just being totally out of control. And but then my rational mind started to say, you need to get out of here, you need to stop this. And so it took all my willpower to stop, get me out of here.
Mm.
I just felt myself being really just pulled completely away. So I'm feeling myself coming back, and I'm telling it to stop. And I open my eyes, and my eyes are like a slot machine
Oh,
going like
oh,
like this. I couldn't see anything except like this in the room. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. My eyes doing that, and I'm thinking, please stop, please stop, please stop. I don't know how long it lasted, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, but finally they slowed down. I was able to see. I still had the laptop, and I just felt so weak, so tired. And I looked over, and I mean, it was really snowing at this point. And so I just set the laptop over on the bed. I brought up my 35 millimeter camera. I wanted to take some photographs of the snow. So I got out of bed, walked over, opened the French doors, and started snapping photographs. So I took like, I think, 6 initial photographs. I'm panning from left to right across the deck and out in the yard, snapping. And then I took, I don't know, maybe 5 additional photos, and, panned on around to the right. And I thought, I am so tired. I just want to go to bed. So I vaguely remember closing the French doors, putting the laptop over, the camera over to the on the table, and going to sleep. So the next morning, I wake up, I'm just extremely fatigued, like, and just felt almost in a hazy kind of state, more than just morning
mhm.
sleepiness. But the snow was so beautiful outside. I grabbed my camera and I took a few more photographs of the morning snow, then went downstairs and just kind of did my morning routine. And my husband, he's like, "What is on your arm?" And I looked down, and I had like, it was like a horseshoe. They were horseshoe dot, a shape, the shape of a horseshoe, but they were dots
Mhm.
on my arm, like right here. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. It was bizarre looking. And he said, was it there? Has it been there? And I said, I don't, it wasn't there when I went to bed. I don't know what
Yeah.
happened overnight. But so I had this weird mark on my arm. So later in the day, I thought I'm going to load these photos onto my computer and get them in a little folder so we can enjoy the snow pictures. So I load them on. I'm looking at them. So I look at the photos 1 through 6 that just look like the normal snowfall from the night before. And then number 7, suddenly there's like this huge area of just blue, like that really pretty blue behind you in your shirt.
Oh,
It was that color, that beautiful blue. And I didn't see that when I took the photograph. I did not see the blue. Then a little further, there's like a box, this right above the deck railing, this rectangle or more of a square box with blue at the top and multicolors inside. And then the next photo, there's like a bright orb right above the hand railing, and that box has morphed more into like a geometric kind of shape with a blue, 2 different color blue stripes in this top left corner, and then this area is gray. The next photo, that has morphed into like a long cylinder of blue. Over here, just the plain blue, but long and skinny. And then the next photo is sort of a rectangle that has a face in it.
a face in it.
It looks like there's a face in it. And I'm thinking, what the heck?
What kind of face was it?
Well, it's hard to make out. You have to really look close. You can kind of see the eyes and the neck. I mean, you cannot make out the face, but there are features there. And then the blue and some other colors are mixed in. And that's it. But I saw none of that when I was taking the photographs. But what was really strange was that I just didn't feel well. I felt like, that eye rolling thing was not normal. I felt that something weird happened. So I went online, started researching, what does it mean when your eyes are like a slot machine? Well, as it turns out, that's a type of seizure. It's called nystagmus epilepsy. And of course, I've never had a seizure in my entire life, no epilepsy, nothing like that. And I was like, oh my God, did I have a seizure? Well, it fit the description perfectly. So I followed up with my primary care physician, went in to see her. She said, I really think you need to see a neurologist just to rule out that you haven't had like a TIA or a stroke or there's something going on in your brain. So I had the neurology appointment. I passed all of the strength test and walking and that kind of stuff. And he said, well, let's just get a baseline MRI. So I went for that just a couple of weeks ago. Everything's normal. There's no sign of MS. There aren't any brain lesions. Brain's fully functioning. So then they're thinking, okay, vertigo, is this the inner ear? So I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor to rule out any kind of vestibular issue, because that can also come into play. Ruled out. So my final conversation with the neurologist is that my brain, a part of my brain, was overstimulated. And I know what overstimulated it, being in that time tunnel.
Right.
I've never had anything like that happen to me before. And it was serious enough, afterwards with the eye rolling that I sought out medical help. And, thankfully nothing organic is wrong. It was just that mandala was pretty powerful or something. I'm not sure. And I don't know if it opened a portal. Was that a portal? out there. So I'm putting together a YouTube video. I've gotten about half the photos, a lot of the narrative, and half the photos in because I can't explain these
Yeah,
photos.
let me know when you have that done. I would definitely want to see that.
Yeah,
That's fantastic. Um, have you gone back to meditate on a Mandela subsequently?
I have not. And
Yeah,
and
I
I
don't
talked
blame
with
you.
my friend Lee. I said, Lee, have you ever had anything like this happen with anyone? Because he's a medium and he works with
Mhm.
clients, and he said one kind of similar situation, not as detailed and in depth as yours, but um, one person, evidently said that they had had some weird experience looking, kind of lost themselves in space and time, looking at his work. Um, but
Yeah, it is it's amazing, when you talk about the fact that you don't see what when you were photographing, okay, you didn't see any of this,
mm-mm,
okay?
mm-mm.
And then when you develop the film, or you know, it's digital, I would assume it was digital. Uh, these things show up, and I've been involved with a case or a person in Sedona, where I was visiting that area and ran into Tom Dongo, and he says, "You got to talk to this lady. She photographs these orbs and all kinds of different things with her camera." And so I went out there, and we were sitting on a back patio. She lives right above a little canyon, and uh, so she gets feelings, she gets vibes, I guess, of some sort, that something is present, and she can't see it with her eyes, but when she photographs these things show up. So I was sitting there, and it's already getting dark, and she says, "Hold on." I want to start taking some pictures. So she went to the corner of the house and panned back at me and started to click her camera, one right after the other. Well, we went back into the house, and, we brought him up on the computer. And sure enough, here's this red orb with like a little yellow cap on it. And it was in one position initially with the cap here, and then it turned the next picture frame. It was in a different position, and then the third time she clicked the camera, it was in another position. Neither one of us saw it, with our own eyes, but on the camera, there it was.
Yeah, I don't know why we can't see it. You know,
Yeah,
Ashley and I, when we worked in the paranormal, oftentimes we felt drawn, to start shooting photographs in a certain direction, not really seeing anything at the time, but then looking back the next day, reviewing the evidence, we see we've either caught, some bright orbs or an apparition, or, that clearly was not visible to the naked eye, but was captured on our equipment. Pretty fascinating. You might be on mute.
thank you. Yeah, our visual range is rather narrow, and so you have infrared and ultraviolet areas that we don't see, and these objects for some reason are in that realm,
Mhm.
and so that's why animals, they have different you know abilities, and sometimes they freak out, when something is nearby. They can tell you that something is happening, or they have that visual acuity that they can see these types of things.
Yeah, I have cats, and I often see them like, one will just be sitting and staring in a corner, like looking up and then kind of moving their head, and there's nothing there. There's not a bug or a moth or anything.
Mhm.
They do that often, like they see things that we don't. But I also see, I've had several cats pass away, and I swear at times I see them,
Mhm.
and my husband too. We'll see their little apparition go
Yeah.
scooting by, and So it's always nice, to have some validation. A lot of these things I experience, I'm kind of in a vacuum. I'm on my own. But whenever my husband has a joint experience with me, that's always a good thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Um, I don't know how much you want me to share, but I've got a really neat story that I can share about he and
Go
I
for it.
experiencing the same thing.
Sure, please.
Um, this would have been, I guess, in the early 2000s. We'd been out to a friend's house for dinner one nice summer evening, and we were driving home. It was probably about 11 o'clock at night. And coming back to our house, there's a really nice long stretch of country road. It's one of my favorite parts of the drive home because there are wheat fields and an old barn. But on this particular night, it was very warm, so we had the windows down, the sunroof open. The big field of hay on this particular stretch of road was newly cut. I could smell the hay, the sweet smell. There was a full moon. It was a harvest moon. And straight up ahead, off in the distance, I could see that there was something in the road in front of me. So I started to slow down, thinking, I don't want to hit an animal. We get closer. I turn on the bright lights, and there's a bird lying in the middle of my lane. It appeared to be an owl. And so my husband and I, we jumped out of the car, go running around, and it's just this beautiful little white owl lying on its back, clearly, deceased. And it just broke my heart. I feed wild birds, I love animals, and I'm like, oh, somebody hit this little owl. So I scooped it up. It was still warm. I could feel the warmth, so it hadn't been laying there that long. My husband opened the passenger door behind the driver's side. I laid it on the floor mat in the back area, shut the door. We both got in the car, got home. So on the way home, we're talking about, we should bury it. I have a pet cemetery, or I had one. Now I'm having my animals cremated, but I do have a pet cemetery. So we were talking about we're going to put it in the pet cemetery. And he said, well, I've got the perfect little box for it. I know, and you get a little blanket and we'll bury it. And so we pull in the driveway, get out, open the passenger door. There's no bird. And I'm like,
wow.
Frank, where's the bird? So he grabs the flashlight out of the glove box. We're looking under the seats, thinking maybe it was just knocked out, and it crawled under the seat. Couldn't find the bird. Bird's not there.
Oh, my goodness.
And I felt it. I knew I had that bird in my hands. It was warm. I laid it in this back floor. There's no bird. So I was like, we got to go back out there. We've got to go back. So we just got in the car, we drove back, and there it was. It was still in the road.
Oh my goodness.
So I go up a little ways, found a place to turn around, and so here I come again. It's like Twilight Zone or something. We're repeating.
Yeah.
Frank said, I'll get the bird. So he got out, he picked the bird up, he put it again behind my seat so he could kind of keep an eye on it on the way home.
Right.
And so on the way home, he said, yeah, it's still there, it's still there. We get home, we get the box, we bury the bird. I mean, it just freaked us out. How could this happen?
Oh my goodness.
So
that is bizarre.
That night, I dreamed about being in a woodland, and it was so vivid. There were pine needles on the ground, huge pine trees. Just the ground was carpeted with all these needles, and off in the distance, I could hear an owl hooting, and it kept hooting, and I got closer and closer. And there sat the same owl in this tree. It was a white owl. And it looked at me and it said, "Listen to me."
Wow.
And that's all I remember. I woke up and
Oh my
what am I
goodness.
supposed to hear? You didn't
Yeah.
say anything, or maybe I didn't hear you.
Hmm.
So that night, same dream. Listen to me. But I got no message that next morning.
Wow.
Third night, same dream. Um, so I thought, what could this mean? So I started meditating. Please make this clear. What am I supposed to be listening to or listening for? I did not have the dream again, but I started having feathers just fall out of the air in front of me. I was sitting out on the back deck one day thinking about that, what had happened, and this little white downy feather just came out of nowhere. And I've had that happen so many times. I've got a jar of feathers behind me. These are all feathers that have just like come out of
Yeah.
nowhere.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I've heard that before with people having experiences like that. They're sending a message and it's like, what is the message? What is the
yeah,
message? But
is to pay attention to your
yeah,
higher self, and
yeah.
I did some automatic writing. Later on, and I did have a message come through. I've got it written down. I don't, I, it's rather lengthy. I won't go into what the message was, but I did write about this. I'm a contributing author to God Talk,
Mm,
Neil Donald Walsh, his book that's out now. So I did contribute that story of the little white owl. And what's interesting, I have Native American, Cherokee, Indian ancestry. My great great grandmother was full blooded Cherokee. I'm 1/16th. And the white owl is very significant
sacred, sacred,
and
very sacred.
sacred.
Yeah.
Um, as a matter of fact, my mother learned how to talk fire from burns from her mother, and her mother learned from her. So it was passed down from that great great grandmother, Keziah Rose. And so I was taught as a young child how to talk fire from burns and to reduce fever. And there's a saying, and you can't say it aloud. You're never permitted to say it aloud. You just say it to yourself, but it involves uh, a white owl. And so
Wow.
that I remembered that from my childhood. I was like, oh my gosh. So I
Yeah.
contributed that part in another book um,
Oh,
about
interesting.
being able to talk fire from burns, and how you learn hand movements, and it's like Reiki. I mean, it's the same
Yeah,
thing that
same
my
thing.
great great grandmother had specific hand movements that she would do over these burns, and she would recite that phrase to herself, and was successful. I mean, children were brought from all over the area to her if they were burned or had fevers. So
That's the
that
part
was,
that's so
uh,
interesting to me.
yeah, I think
That
that was just tapping into my
and
Native American.
unfortunately, a lot of these people, in centuries past, were burned at the stake because they were witches. You know, they they had these abilities that people just couldn't understand,
Yeah,
and it's tragic.
instead of
That
seeing them as God given, they just thought it
Yeah.
was something from the devil.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about a white owl. I had the same thing happen to me, not as dramatic as what happened to you. I usually, this is when I was living in California, and I went for an early morning walk every day. And this one day, I saw this white owl, obviously dead in the road. And so I picked it up and I brought it home and eventually buried it. But it didn't come back, or I didn't have any dreams about it, but I did also have a white owl in my life as well. But your story is especially the going back and not being there the first time. That's pretty dramatic.
I know, and I'm just so thankful my husband, was with me because that
Yeah.
was a profound experience
Oh,
to have
absolutely.
felt that bird's body in my hands and know that it was in my car. I don't know what the purpose was in having me retrace my steps unless it was a test to see would I be willing to go back
Mm-hmm.
and actually look
That's
again.
that came to my mind that this was some kind of a test.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Okay, let's see if she'll go back, and
yeah.
that's meaningful. Well, I'll tell you what, we're at the end of this particular segment. So what I would like to do is if you would like to talk about your website or anything else that you'd like to put out to our listeners, this is a good opportunity to do it right now.
Okay. I do have a website, PamelaNance.com. I have, quite a bit of evidence posted, EVPs, photographs, some of the missing time information, and just a sort of a synopsis of all the experiences I've had. And I wrote a white paper using archaeological, sort of the archaeological approach to the paranormal that's on there. I also have a YouTube channel at Pamela Nance 1111. So I put together about 15 YouTube videos, and the snowfall video will be up there hopefully in the next month or so. It's hard, it's hard work, but I'll get it
All
there.
right. That sounds great. Well, I tell you, Pamela, thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank our listeners. Um, as I mentioned earlier, we're a nonprofit and we depend on donations. So we greatly appreciate anything you can do in that regard. Just go to opusnetwork.org and there's a donation button there. And please hit the subscribe button and join us for more interviews. Once again, another fantastic time with Pamela. So, Pamela, thank you again. And I look forward to another session with you.
Sure. It was my pleasure, Les. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to your audience for
You bet.
listening.
Thank you so much. Have a great
Okay.
rest of the day.
You too.